When I made the jump to light speed and had enough capital to start investing and became very wealthy by most people's standards, my tax rate plummeted. And I don't think that's the way to operate a nation. I think you need a progressive tax structure. So I would love to see someone make $1 trillion. I just think we need to go back to the last century where we were charging 50, 60% plus tax rates because that person isn't going to get any less happy.
When one man holds more wealth than 52% of American households combined, you don't have a free market success story. You have a broken tax system designed to shelter oligarchs while squeezing working class earners. On Piers Morgan Uncensored, tech entrepreneur and professor Scott Galloway sat across from Piers and laid bare the central absurdity of modern economic policy. We've built an economy where middle-class wage earners pay higher effective tax rates than trillion-dollar bound CEOs, while populist politicians try to distract us with chaotic tariff wars that alienate our closest allies. Galloway didn't pull punches on Elon Musk's wealth or Maga's trade blunders, and Piers had virtually no defense. I'm Neil. This is The Honest Perspective. Real prosperity means taxing capital, protecting workers, and ditching economic gimmicks. Let's get into it.
I think one of the wonderful things about capitalism is there aren't really a ceiling or upward limits on your compensation. I think that's a powerful motivator and one of the reasons people immigrate to the United States. And philosophically, I actually don't have a problem with this. If he creates, Kevin was saying, if he creates $7 to $8 trillion in incremental value, that he's going to get, I guess, about 12 or 15% of it. That's not an unreasonable trade philosophically. If Tim Cook went to Apple shareholders and said, I want $1 trillion if I make this company worth 15 trillion, not 4, I would argue that the shareholders wouldn't be outraged or wouldn't be, irrational to consider that. Where I have an issue is the following, and that is, I want someone to make $1 trillion. I just think they should pay a greater tax rate. And that is someone like Elon Musk, who has become very wealthy based on his genius and his risk taking, but also on tax credits funded by middle class taxpayers. When we're spending $7 trillion on $5 trillion in receipts, the bottom line is, do we have to cut spending or increase tax revenue? The answer is yes. And corporations are paying their lowest taxes since 1939. The 25 wealthiest families pay an average tax rate of 6%. Elon Musk is now worth more than the bottom 52% of households combined. I think that we just need greater incremental marginal tax rates. And also, I think what you want is taxes that are least taxing. And what Daniel Kahneman, who's an intellectual role model of mine, states in his wonderful work is that once you get to a certain point of wealth, above that, you don't get any incremental happiness. So the fact that Elon Musk can kind of piece out and become a resident of Texas and end up, and I've done this personally. When I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars in my 30s and 40s, I've always made an exceptional living. I've been very blessed, and I'm not modest. I'm hardworking and talented. I was paying 40+% in tax rates. When I made the jump to light speed and had enough capital to start investing and became very wealthy by most people's standards, my tax rate plummeted. And I don't think that's the way to operate a nation. I think you need a progressive tax structure. So I would love to see someone make $1 trillion. I just think we need to go back to the last century where we were charging 50, 60% plus tax rates because that person isn't going to get any less happy. But if you're able to reinvest that money in new technologies that support American households, education, universal child care, I think that you end up with a lot more civic prosperity. In sum, I want them to make $1 trillion. I just want them to pay more than 15 or 18% tax rate.
Notice what Galloway is doing here. He isn't making a moral argument about whether Elon Musk is a good or bad guy. He's pointing out the structural cheat code of our tax code. If your wealth comes from income, you get taxed at every step. If your wealth comes from asset appreciation and stock options, you borrow against your equity, pay single-digit tax rates, and leave the bill to the middle class. Let's watch Galloway take this a step further and connect billionaire tax breaks directly to the failed logic of Maga Tariff policy.
And Kevin mentioned Canada and China. I would argue that these sclerotic, irrational tariffs have thrust a lot of nations who traditionally weren't friends with China have thrust them into their hands. The most chilling image of 2025 was Modi, Xi, and Putin all acting like they're at a fraternity party, and it didn't need to happen. Japan South Korea and China are having trade talks for the first time in a long while. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, is on a tour through Asia. 24% of Chinese exports used to come into China. Now it's 17. They're diversifying away from us. And effectively, these tariffs were supposed to inspire a flurry of deal making, and they are. Unfortunately, the deal making is outside of the US. People are reconfiguring their supply chains to avoid the US, who they feel they can't count on. They don't understand the tariff policy. It seems to be based on the blood sugar level of a president and his chief economist, who, quite frankly, is citing uh, people who don't exist in economic papers. And we have seen throughout economic history, tariffs are an elegant way to reduce prosperity. As it relates to Canada, 70% of their exports come to the US. It's like that Animal House line. You effed up, you trusted us. They have based a big portion of their economy on good relationships with the US. It's the largest undefended border in the world. And yet we have decided to declare economic warfare on them. And it's not only, there's nothing, the only thing worse than fighting with your allies is fighting without them. They've been amazing allies for us. And to think that we're just, quite frankly, messing with them this much is just not very smart. In addition, if you just look at free trade, I agree with Kevin, we should have free trade with Canada. We Americans asymmetrically benefit. They import into the US low margin products, lumber, petroleum, oil, operating margins of 10 to 20%, companies that trade at a P multiple of 20. We import into Canada high margin products, iPhones, cars, electronics that have 30 to 40 points of operating margin with companies that trade at multiples of a P multiple of 30. In other words, for every dollar we make from products we ship into Canada, we get about $3 in shareholder value. They get about one. So if there's any asymmetry in free trade that accretes to one partner, it asymmetrically benefits the US. So not only is this waving our middle finger and an amazing ally, it's just economically stupid what we have done. So in addition, if you want to talk about a great ally, I love the question posed to his friend, Warren Buffett, a Holocaust survivor. He said, how do you know if someone's your friend? And she responded, she asked herself, would they hide me? I mean, that's a really puncturing question. And here's the bottom line. As it relates to America and Canadians being our friend, they hit us. 1979 Iranian hostage crisis, Canadian diplomats held Americans, hid them, and then got them out of the country safely, and then stayed behind at huge personal risk to them. It's just striking to me that we would be this damaging and this hostile towards a nation that has been such an incredible friend of the United States. So I would argue that the Trump administration tariff policies are not only inconsistent and unpredictable, they're just baseline stupid.
Scott Galloway is putting his finger on the fundamental scam of modern political economy, and the receipts back him up completely. When Galloway notes that ultra-wealthy figures like Musk pay effective tax rates of 15% to 18%, or even lower, that is actually a conservative estimate when you look at how true wealth accumulation works in America. According to landmark tax data compiled by ProPublica analyzing IRS records of the top 25 wealthiest Americans, their true tax rate, measured as the tax paid relative to the growth in their net worth, averaged just 3.4% over a 4-year period. A White House Council of Economic Advisors study similarly revealed that the top 400 billionaire families paid an average federal individual income tax rate of just 8.2% from 2010 to 2018. Compare that to a nurse, a teacher, or a truck driver who routinely pay an effective tax rate of 14% to 22% on every single dollar they earn. Why does this asymmetry exist? Because our code heavily taxes labor, the work you do with your hands and brain, while giving preferential treatment to capital gains, buy, borrow, die asset loops, and corporate tax havens. During America's most prosperous era of middle-class growth in the 1950s under Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the top marginal tax rate on extreme income was 91%. Nobody was discouraged from building businesses, but the excess was redirected to build public infrastructure, fund higher education, and support families. Today, we've inverted the entire model. Middle-class taxpayers fund the roads, the GPS networks, and the federal subsidies that make companies like Tesla and SpaceX viable, while the owners pay less percentage-wise than the people installing the solar panels. And when working, people start feeling the squeeze of stagnant wages and skyrocketing housing costs. Right-wing politicians step in with a classic shell game: tariffs. As Galloway pointed out, slapping broad, erratic tariffs on key trading partners like Canada doesn't punish foreign elites. It operates as a regressive consumption tax on American consumers. When you tax imported raw materials like Canadian lumber, steel, and energy, American homebuilders pay more, American manufacturers pay more, and those costs get passed directly to working families at the grocery store and the hardware aisle. Worse, it destroys international solidarity. Slapping 25% tariffs on our closest economic and security partner, a country that hid American diplomats during the 1979 Iran hostage crisis, doesn't put America first. It forces our trade partners to build supply chains with China, Europe, and South America, leaving American workers isolated in a high-cost bubble. The billionaire class gets tax cuts, corporate monopolies get deregulation, and working-class families get told that higher prices on goods and trade wars with our neighbors will somehow make them prosperous. Galloway called it what it is: baseline stupid. But more than that, it's economic exploitation dressed up as national pride. If you believe that workers who build the wealth deserve a fair system, and that billionaires shouldn't pay lower tax rates than the people who clean their offices, hit that subscribe button and join The Honest Perspective. I'm Neil. Real economy over billionaire welfare. That's The Honest Perspective, and that's where I'll leave you.